Motor torpedo boat Squadron 3, 6 boats commanded by Lieutenant John D. Buckeley, had arrived in Manila Bay on September 28, 1941. During the 4 dark months of the hopeless defense of the Philippines, the officers and men of Squadron 3 carried the fight to the enemy with determination and shining courage until those boats could fight no more. Their actions are glowingly described in the Hollywood movie of the time. They were expendable, which the boats ultimately were. I just don't think they gave these men the kudos they deserve, and the movie doesn't tell the story of the boats that accurately either. Today we're going to look at the actual fates of these 6 boats and why I think the crews were ballsier than Hollywood made out. But first I'm going to have a quick intro on the construction of the boats, which has some bearing on their stories. The first of these 6 boats was laid down on March 25, 1941 at ELCO's boatyard in New Jersey, and the last was completed on July the 23rd of that same year. Their classification started out as PT boat, but in most cases was changed to motor boat submarine chaser. Later they were changed back to PT boat, with the boat numbers changing a few times in the process, but finally they settled into PT boats 31 through 35 plus PT 41. You can check out the description for the fine print. Despite the rather rude slander of the time, these boats were not made of plywood. They were carefully built, mostly from solid mahogany boards, laminated into structural parts like beams and frames, assembled over a hardwood keel made from solid white oak. Only a very little marine plywood was used, and only in non-structural applications. Almost 500,000 screws, nails, and rivets were used in each boat. The construction makes them very strong, but with just a little flex to handle the pounding of the waves, which is intense when these little rippers are going at full speed. The roughly 4,000 horsepower from the three 40-liter Packard 3M 2500 V12 engines could push the PT boats to speeds well above 40 knots, even close to 50. Developed from aviation engines, these finicky beasts were liquid-cooled and supercharged. Running flat out, together they could consume as much as 500 gallons of premium 100-octane avgas in just 1 hour. At that rate, the engines would empty the 3,000-gallon self-sealing fuel tanks in about 6 hours. One engine could push the boat at about 12 knots for a mere 66 gallons per hour. That's about 5.5 gallons per nautical mile if you think in automotive terms. The boats were fitted with 2 twin 50 caliber machine gun turrets and sometimes 2 30 caliber Lewis guns as well. For offense, they carried 4 torpedo tubes and at inception Mark 8 torpedoes. On August 12, 1941, all 6 boats were officially assigned to Lieutenant John D. Buckeley of the newly formed Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 and quickly loaded aboard the oiler USS Guadalupe, which then set off for the Philippines via Hawaii. Buckeley and his men settled quickly into Cavite Naval Base, getting to know the submarine service crews who would be their source of torpedoes. After Pearl Harbor, he'd sensed trouble and he had moved his 9 spare engines out of the naval yard for safety, but couldn't move much of their stash of avgas. At this point, the Mark 8 was the standard torpedo of the US Navy, and these PT boat cowboys were stationed in a base full of submarines. Pretty soon they would start hearing all of the scuttlebutt on the Mark 8's reliability, accuracy, or lack of from the submariners that were using them. On December 10, 1941, Japanese planes attacked Cavite Naval Yard and caused heavy damage. The squadron ran interference during this desperate defense of the base, shooting down a claimed 3 aircraft. After the raid, the PT boats helped transport injured personnel to the hospital at Canyacao. The destruction at Cavite was so severe and so likely to be repeated that the squadron was forced to relocate to Sisiman Bay, which is on the Batayan Peninsula, and that's basically a fishing village. Worse, the The raid had robbed the boats of most of their fuel, and only the 9 spare engines stashed off base had survived. The only repair facility available to them now was an old submarine tender, the Canopus, and an ancient floating dry dock, the Dewey, in which the boats could be hauled out. At least the Canopus had workshops and mechanics, but she was bombed twice at the end of the year, although not sunk, and carried on working as a repair shop, beached and listing. The crew were setting smoky fires by day to deter the Japanese from wasting any more bombs on her, while sneakily working away at night. The Packard PT boat engines were supposed to be completely overhauled every 750 hours. Going forward, they would face an uphill battle with fuel shortages, fuel sabotaged by Japanese sympathizers, and a lack of spare parts. It was only possible to run the engines on low-quality fuel if boost was reduced, and thus power. The saboteurs added wax to the fuel, which dissolves but then can solidify again in carburetors and filters, blocking the fuel flow, stopping the engines with almost no warning. During December, most of the fleet sailed south, and on the night of the 17th, the SS Corregidor, a ship transporting mostly VIP evacuees from Manila bound for Australia, accidentally hit an American sea mine and rapidly sank. Squadron 3 responded immediately with PT-32, 34, 35, racing out to rescue a total of 296 survivors, with PT-32 alone cramming 196 aboard. This probably resulted in the engines overheating, and after the rescue was over, she suffered an accidental explosion in the engine room which disabled the boat for weeks while it could be repaired. With the Japanese now bombing Manila at will, on December 21st, MacArthur moved his headquarters to the fortress of Corregidor Island. The charts available to the Navy at the time were notoriously poor, and of course both sides were operating in blackout conditions, which made navigation difficult. On Christmas Eve 1941, PT-33 went patrolling south of Manila Bay with 1 destroyer, and went hard aground on a reef 5 miles north of Cape Santiago. On Christmas Day, PTs 31 and 41 made 3 attempts to pull her off the reef, but couldn't budge her. There's no mention of the destroyer helping out though. On the morning of December 26, PT-33 was set afire to prevent her from falling into the hands of the enemy. Just days later, Manila was declared an open city in the hopes of sparing it from further destruction. Admiral Hart left on the submarine in shock. On January 18, 1942, after dark, PT-34 under the command of Lieutenant John D. Buckeley with Ensign Baron W. Chandler plus PT-31 under the command of Lieutenant Edward G. DeLong proceeded to the mouth of Subic Bay. At the entrance, the boats split up, with PT-34 patrolling the western side, while 31 patrolled the eastern side, planning to meet up at the entrance to Benanga Bay. After splitting up, PT-31 suffered engine problems and cooling issues and drifted onto a coral reef while the engines were out and they had no steerage. Spotted from shore, a Japanese 3-inch gun near Ilinin Point began firing at them. Aboard, the anchor was dropped in an attempt to back off the reef, burning out the reverse gears, and was still hard aground. On the morning of the 19th, DeLong ordered the crew to abandon ship before enemy aircraft might arrive with daybreak, and the crew used the engine room hatch with mattresses tied to it as a life raft, while DeLong scuttled PT-31 by puncturing the fuel tanks, which isn't easy because they self-seal, using hand grenades, causing a fire and explosion for several hours. Squadron 3's most famous mission was probably the evacuation of General Douglas MacArthur and his staff from Corregidor in March 1942. The story is detailed in the previous video, which is linked above. PT-32 on March 11, 1942 at 7:15 p.m. under the command of Lieutenant Schumacher embarked passengers including Brigadier Generals Aiken, Casey, Marquardt, and George, along with Lieutenant Colonel Scher. PT-34 and 32 rendezvoused in Manila Bay with the 41 boat, with MacArthur aboard. During the night, the 4 PT boats became separated, and PT-32 experienced engine trouble with only 2 engines running, and as a result had to jettison their deck fuel drums to reduce weight and maintain speed. In the afternoon of March 12th, PT-32 finally arrived at Cavite Island, now only with 1 engine running and without the deck fuel drums to refuel. Taking on water, PT-32 was unable to continue the mission. Instead, her VIP passengers were transferred aboard PT-41 and 34. Schumacher and his crew remained with the PT-32. Buckeley, completely unaware of their fate, later spent days in a scout plane looking for the boat and the crew. On March 13th, USS Permit arrived and the crew transferred to the submarine and reluctantly destroyed PT-32 by gunfire to prevent capture. Abandoning Corregidor had meant that 3 spare engines were left behind, meaning very few spare parts going forwards. It also meant the command structure was falling apart, and unable to communicate, MTB Squadron 3 was no longer under anyone's direct control. Arriving in Cagayan, PT-34 had to have temporary emergency engine repairs, and without any further orders in particular, was then limped north to Cebu on 1 engine at a reduced speed of just 12 knots to be repaired properly. Buckeley also thought that there was a chance there were still torpedoes to be had in Cebu. The trip to Cebu is 132 nautical miles, give or take, which means at least an 11-hour trip. That's very tight if you're hoping to avoid being spotted in daylight. After the missions to evacuate MacArthur and Quezon, PT-41 now was the only unit still fully operational. PT-35 meanwhile had escaped Bataan and headed south for Mindanao, which is after all where most of the superior officers had fled to.
On the trip down the west coast of Negros Island, PT-35 had hit a submerged object in the water while cruising at speed and was damaged and started taking on water. And rather than risk the crossing to Mindanao, it was decided to put the boat on the beach right here in Zamboanguita and try to make some repairs. Help was recruited from local fishermen who, as you can see, there are a lot of fishing boats. They built them right here on these beaches, much of them from coconut lumber, which is very hard. And with the help of the locals, they were able to make repairs on the boat within about a week to allow her to be driven off again and make the 85 nautical mile journey to Cebu. And think about that, at a reduced speed of 12 knots, that's at least a 7-hour trip. If it's windy like this, or there's the usual current that there is, that means it's a 12-hour trip, which means you're exposed in the daytime.
On April 8, 1942, PT-41, on a night patrol under the command of Buckeley and with coxswain PT-34, encountered the light cruiser Kuma off the tip of Cebu Island in the Tenon Strait opposite Dumaguete and decided to engage her. Leading the attack, PT-41 fired 2 torpedoes aimed at the port side, but they ran erratically and missed. I think by now they were using the Mark 13 torpedo, which is probably just as bad as the Mark 8, if not worse. Circling hard away to the right, PD-41 was caught in the cruiser's searchlight momentarily, and then fired her last two torpedoes aimed at the bow and amidships, but observed no explosions. Meanwhile, PT-34 made a torpedo attack from 500 yards, while 41 circled in an attempt to draw away their fire and disable its searchlight with gunfire. This action is very well depicted in They Were Expendable. The way that they approached on opposite sides of the cruiser, with one drawing off fire while the other attacks. However, the movie shows the Kuma spewing balls of fire after being hit with torpedoes, but in reality they were duds that just bounced harmlessly off the hull, probably doing nothing more than scare a few Japanese sailors. This in no way detracts from the bravery of these crews, quite the contrary. I think they were well aware of how unreliable the torpedoes were. They could have easily avoided the 5,000-ton Kuma and its 5.5-inch guns and just run, but they were determined to have a go anyway.
So this whole engagement with the Kuma took place right out here. It's just off the front of Dumaguete. In fact, the professors at Sisiman University were able to watch the whole thing, the searchlights, the gunfire. Just out there. That's Cebu Island. Over there is Sumilon, and over there is Siquijor.
After expending all torpedoes, they withdrew to the south. Remember that at this point, they don't have a superior officer within a day's sail, and even they are wasting no time departing for Australia. On this day, April 9th, combined forces on Bataan had surrendered, and at Sisiman, the Canopus was finally forced to give up the pretense of being wrecked, was backed off the beach and sunk for real. The PT boat's last base was now gone, sunk beneath the waves. Time to chase the bosses and follow them south. After spending all their torpedoes and with crew injured in the attack, PT-41 returned to Mindanao as the last boat still operational in Squadron 3, but without any torpedoes. Although Buckeley wanted to return to Cebu City for rearming, the Japanese were known to be occupying the area already, and he knew that no torpedoes were available on Mindanao. On April 9th, after the attack on the Kuma, PT-34 went on to Cebu to get medical treatment for ensigns Reynolds and Richards, who were injured in the attack on the Kuma. Lacking proper charts, continuing theme, they ran aground near Cebu in the dark and had to rock the boat off the reef in the early morning. Ensigns Richards and Reynolds were meanwhile taken ashore by dinghy and treated for their wounds. Unfortunately, in the morning, the 34 boat was spotted by F-1M2 Pete aircraft from Sanuki Maru, which dropped 8 bombs and then strafed the PT boat. 2 crewmen were killed in the attack and 2 more injured. While defending the beach boat, the crew shot down one of the Petes. However, the engine room was flooded and skipper Robert B. Kelly beached PT-34 at Cavite Island rather than have her sink. Midday, the seaplanes returned, setting the boat ablaze and causing a fuel explosion that destroyed it completely. After being towed to the slipway on Mactan Island and still under repair there, on April 12, 1942, Japanese forces entered Cebu City and PT-35 was scuttled and burned to prevent her capture at the slipway, less than 5 miles from PT-34. On April 13, 1942, at Iligan, Mindanao, PT-41 was transferred to the U.S. Army, who intended to move the PT boat by road inland and then place it on Lake Lanao. The idea was to use the boat to try to prevent the Japanese using the big lake as a seaplane base. The 3 engines were removed and the hull was trucked along a steep and narrow road southward towards Lake Lanao. Just 2 days later, the hull was destroyed on the road near Lake Lanao to prevent capture by the advancing Japanese. The fate of the 3 engines moved to Lake Lanao is unknown, but given how thirsty and fussy they were likely not used again. The Kuma was eventually sunk by a British submarine in January 1944 off of Penang.